Alrighty, let's do week 2 in CIT 82. And this week, as I kind of viewed last week, I wanted your feedback for completing the week 1 review. Because as I said, that's a product that I've been working on, helping create in the world, and it's very exciting. I'm both a little nervous, but I am really interested of your experience of doing that. Did you have any problems? Well, if you didn't have any problems, great. What was your experience of interacting with the chat? In this case, were you able to get all the way through? Just anything really that from the user UI. This is important actually. User interface perspective, right? Because you're the user, right? And the interface we've created is something that I want to make better. And there are things I know I want to do. So your feedback is really helpful. And these are things as I go out when I'm now starting to present this to different conferences, your feedback becomes a part of our presentation, not your name specifically. Definitely don't use that, but just your feedback. So in your reply, you'll see me give you some points for doing that. So let's talk about this week's work. I'll open this in another tab. And there's videos that cover this week, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but we cover, a little bit of history of the internet, what is HTTP, hands-on with that, and we'll look at Stack Overflow, the developer survey. If you don't know about Stack Overflow, trust me, the more you're around this topic, you'll hear about it. Although it is also being affected by ChatGPT as well. And then on Thursday, and this is the breakdown, right? So even though we're in a normal week with the holiday, I move everything over to the next day. But because of this class and the nature of the compressed mode, I definitely would tell you try not to wait. Now, Monday, I don't know if I may be traveling on Monday, right? But so I may not get to grade on Monday, depending on what's happening. But definitely have that work done so that the sooner I can check it out, which some of you have already been doing, working ahead of the due date, which is great. Okay, so we have 3 items. This is kind of normal from here on out. Lecture, hands-on, current topics. And then Thursday, lecture, hands-on, current topics, and then you'll have a review. Not just like in the way that similar, but I will then cover the content and I'll pick and choose mostly from lectures and videos like this where we've learned some new things. Okay, so that's the week you have in front of you. Oh, the one thing I did change this week on the review is because I made it due on Friday, but here's what I want you to know. Actually, if you finish it by the time I get to check in on a normal Monday, and in this case, because it's a holiday, it'll be a Tuesday, as long as it's there at that point, I'm not going to consider it late. So I made it this way because I based on the way the work is, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to give a little more time for that particular one. So know that even though it's set, I think, for midnight on Friday, I won't see it because I don't grade over the weekend. By the way, if you don't know this, my normal job, Monday through Friday, I'm not around typically on the weekend doing work related to the course. So that's why. But I did want to give just a little bit of flexibility. Okay, so that's what you're going to do this week. Again, there's videos to cover that content. So I'm going to close this tab. So what are we going to do? This week, the first thing I'm going to have you do is set up a URL for your public repo. Okay, so let's just kind of remind ourselves. So in here, if I go to github.com/CIT82, right, and I do then / my public repo, right, I'm looking at GitHub from a web-based, file-based perspective. I'm looking at it not as a I am looking at it as a web page, but what it's showing me, if a typical user is here, is not what you might consider a typical web page, right? They wouldn't see these files listed. They just wouldn't, right? So in this case, one of the things we're going to do, because when you're doing the code along or the lecture work, I say code along because that's my other classes. When you're doing lecture work, that's done on your private repo and only you and I see it. But when it's done on the public repos, one of the things is anyone can see it. And They won't be as interested as we are. What the files are, they actually want to see a web page. Okay. So that's what is good about what we're about to do is we're going to take your public repos and we're going to give you a URL that is actually going to render, and you'll see this as we move through this week, a web page, either as a HTML, which we'll learn on Thursday, or in this assignment as a Markdown, which you've actually already seen and you will see again today. Okay, so first and then when we're in code space, which I already have open, I already have for my public, and you want to do this as well, have your code space open, right? You just don't see it because I've already was in there. If I refresh it, then you would see the name of my code space, right? So then I have my code space open, right? And this has that README file in the root, and this is how we refer to it. Now, if you're working local, which I don't think hardly, maybe one person is in here. If you're taking some of my other classes, you'll know that when you're working local, it'll look a little bit different. But in this case, our root is our public repo, and then we're going to create. We've already created. Actually, this one looks a little different because it doesn't have that get help. So, but you have that README file, okay? And this is what's going to render when somebody goes to what we're about to create. So let's go do that. So now over on GitHub, not in your code space, but have it open because we're going to work there in a minute. Over on your public under looking at it on GitHub, go to settings, okay? Under settings, scroll down and you'll see all of these options, and scroll down past code spaces and look for pages. Under pages, what we're going to do is something called GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages is a very commonly used way to take whatever we've coded, and most likely it's a web page, to render as a web page, as it is normally seen in the world, not as we see it on GitHub as coders. Okay. So to do this, we're going to deploy a branch, okay? So branches are important. You'll learn them the more work you do around web development, and reasons you would use different branches will be based on what kind of work you're doing, what kind of team you're doing, what kind of standards they use. So for us, for the most part, we only use what's called the main branch. So I'm going to come down here. So come past build and deploy and go to branch. Go where it says none, down arrow, and hit main. And now what it'll say is, hey, do you want to go out of the root? That's why I was saying before that we're at the root of your public repo out on GitHub. So now hit save. Now when you do this, in the background, there's little programs that are fired off on GitHub. And GitHub does quite a few different things, but basically what it does is it takes your public repo and it's going to give you a URL that will render a web page. Okay, very common. So in this case, you might wonder, well, where is it at? Well, it takes it a moment here. It takes it a moment to show up. Okay. So one of the things I'm going to do is refresh my page. It's still not there. That's okay. And if it's not there on the next time I refresh it, that's okay. And it may happen for you as well. And so, you could do it and then, wait for a little bit. And this will be dependent on what's happening on GitHub, because there's these little microservices, we call them, that are sent off to do the work of setting up the DNS. Something we haven't talked about here, but the way basically we find things through URLs, through domain names, it's got to do that work. I'm going to refresh again, and look, it actually showed up. So you could kind of see typical what shows up there. All right, so now we have this nice URL. So instead of looking at it as coders do, let's look at it as typical users would. And so what I'm going to do here is if I click here, it's going to take me out of GitHub. So I'm actually going to right click and say open in a new tab. And when I do that, now I have a tab, and that URL, CIT82 github.io. .io is what GitHub uses as its top level domain. And now what it's saying is, now this is the domain, right? The subdomain is our organization, And then in here is our folder for our repo. So it's looking there, and what is it rendering is if I go back to, let's just say over here to my code space, it's rendering this, okay? This README file. And what you'll see on Thursday night's item is how that looks different when it's an HTML file. So because there's not an HTML file here, it's going to render the README file. That's just the way the server, when it looks through that folder to say, hey, what am I going to give you? What am I going to render back to you? That's how it's done. Okay. So first, you now have a new URL in your life that for public and for our discussions, depending on how we're using it, and for sure for our project 0, this is what we'll end up using. And as we create folders, which I'm about to do right now with you, you'll see how this will work. Okay, so now I'm going to leave that up. Over here, I'm actually going to go back. So now that I've done that on GitHub, I'm going to go back to the public repo. Nothing changed here. It was just on GitHub side, they turned on some switches, so to speak, and now we have a URL. Okay, so now let's do the rest of the work, right? So now we've done this step. Okay, so now open up the cheat sheet for Markdown because I had you copy some Markdown I'd already done. So now you're going to create some Markdown, okay? Just to get some experience with Markdown because you're going to use it this week and now is a good time to do it. So over here is the link to Markdown, right? So headings, bold, italics, block scope. So these are all minimal ways. Markdown versus markup. I believe I talked about that. And so in this first basic block, I want you to use most of this. You don't have to use image, although you totally can play around with that. But I want you to find ways. Code might be a little more interesting. You actually could do that as well. If you wanted to play around with that horizontal line, give a link for sure, okay? But what are you going to be doing? Okay, so now that we know that syntax, and I'll just walk you through in a minute here, right? You're going to, in your public repo, right, in your code space, which I just was in, you're going to create a new folder. And this is something you're going to do this week. So this is kind of why I'm doing this assignment. We're going to name that folder W2, right? And inside there, we're going to create a new file. And actually, I changed this. I'll change on the fly. You get to see me do things on the fly. So actually in that W2, it's going to be called README. And this doesn't follow my naming standards because it's a file that has a specific meaning on the server. Okay, but let's actually do this now. Okay, so over on CodeSpace, right? Now I showed you this before when you did the Get Help, so we're gonna do it again. So now folder, right? So remember, roll over and see and first you want to be in that public level, in that root level. Okay, so over here, we're going to click W2. Okay, so that, and you can tell it's a folder because it actually has a little caret there, and that indicates on this interface that's a folder. It may not be what you normally see, like when you create folders, but that's what it is. And now in this folder, because it's highlighted, we'll create a new file called readme.md. So you can have, as you see, multiple README files. This is very common. And so in here, right, so now I have that new file. I've got a markdown file. I noticed somewhere else when I did this, the icon looked different, but that's okay too. That's probably based on maybe how I have icons set up or something else. Oh, actually, it was when it was local, maybe? Yeah, I don't remember. So and now I have a blank file open, and I'm going to drop this, okay? So in here, I'm going to do a heading 1 because remember, I want you to use, main headings, subheadings. I want you to use bold because really this is just something to get you to get in and do Markdown. That's what this assignment's to do. But the topic of this is your day, okay? And so for those of you that accidentally saw this assignment already, you can make sure it meets my requirements, but copy and paste that, right? So now you're going to go through, right, and outline your day and do it using some of this Markdown in various ways. Get creative, have fun with this. As long as you've used I would say 90% of this, I'm going to give you the points. You can maybe do link image. That'd be fun because we actually haven't talked about how to do this. We're going to talk about images when we get to the Thursday night item, so that should be fun. Okay, so, oh, actually, I've already changed the name of it here. At least 5 of those. Okay, so finished. And so when you're done with this work, right? And I'm not going to do this here. This is your job. You will do this part. So when you're done, though, I give you, and this is very common in my class, I will give you a commit message, right? So once you're done, that you will do the commit. Okay, so let's actually do that to get the experience because you're going to see me stop more saying just do the get workflow instead of actually stepping you through. I think I do a little bit in the first item, but just know that's kind of how I do it. I show you and I show you a couple times and then I'm like, okay, you got it, else go back and look. Okay, so oh, actually, let's do it right. I'm going to do first clear to get rid of all that other stuff. You probably didn't see it. I think it only happens when you first set it up. So get status is going to show me that I have untracked files, which I know here, right? I see that one. I do have that. So now I do get add star. So I would stage it, add stages it. It says, hey, this is what I'm going to have you version control. I could do multiples adds. I might need to do that, but typically you follow that by a get commit -m open quote, and then I give you the message. Right? Again, read the instruction going through this week because I give you the commit messages I want you to use. So now I've done most of the workflow. The piece I haven't done is I haven't pushed it to GitHub yet. Okay. Again, if I go look at GitHub right now, it's not going to have that. Even if I refresh it, it's not going to show that W2 folder. Because why? Because I have not done the last step, right? And the reason I'm pointing this out is when you're doing work in this class, there may be times you do multiple commits, and then when you're done at the end, you do git push. Okay, I was talking to somebody today, and it was like, this Git workflow is a more specific way of doing a save, and it is saving the actual code that you're doing. Okay, the coding and the version, so we can see exactly that level of detail, which is what we want to see. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and do a git push. Okay, so just know when you're going through the work this week, that may not always be true. Don't drop me for a minute. Okay, so now that I've done that, and again, you need to finish the work. I already showed you at least 5. Again, I'm going to update that because I'm almost 90% of this. And by the way, you can go into this other part as well. It doesn't hurt as well. There's an emoticon, emojis you could put on here. I mean, you could have fun with this. I would really say have fun with this. Go through and tell us as much as you want. Make up a day. It doesn't have to necessarily be your day. You can do that as well. Okay, I'm going to drop this file, and now in here, because I'm simulating the idea that I'm done and I've pushed my code, I'm going to be a good code space user, and I'm going to stop my code space so that time, and again, I'm trying to teach you good hygiene around that may be not the right word to use here, but hygiene around your code spaces. And while that's stopping, I'm going to go back here, okay? Actually, this is the URL we set up, so I'm going to come back here. I'm going to go back to GitHub. I'm going to hit refresh because when I did that push, then I got that W2 directory, and now I have that README in here, and you should see it render. You should see your work in here, okay? But when you're doing the reply, you're going to give us the URL that we created up here. But now we're actually going to say, hey, take this URL that you've created and now also specify the W2 so that in the URL, when somebody else looks at your post here, they're going to see that. So let me actually show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go over to this URL that we created, this GitHub Pages URL. And now, remember, this is rendering the README that's on the root of that. So all I have to do is specify W2 here, hit enter. And now, you will see your work. your markdown and all the things that you laid out here. And when I copy this, come back to here, paste that, right? I hit enter. And you do want to make sure when you hit enter here, that does show up as a link. Now, by the way, good to know this in Canvas. If you come over here and you hit this, this actually is going to show you the HTML. So this is what Canvas does to the text when we give it, because Canvas says, hey, and it doesn't tell you this, but I know you're pasting a URL. I'm going to make that a link. I'm going to make that an active link. That's what href is for. You'll learn this in the course, okay? It's going to add some other things like span, which is actually a CSS. It's going to add a class. It's okay if you don't know this stuff. This is part of what you learn here, okay? But now I'm going to take it back to what it looks like here, because this is what most people see, okay? This is most students using Canvas, this is all they see. They don't see the underneath that you just saw, right? They might use some of this, what we call WYSIWYG editing to do it, but we really want to see what happens underneath. Okay, so now, you're going to provide in here, right, your feedback, right? So you could even do this. You could do my feedback. Actually, I like this, right? So I could make this maybe, and we could talk about headings, but in this case, a heading 4. Now, this is not a markdown heading. This is actually an HTML heading. And if you wanted to see that, you could go back and look. It's an H4, okay? And in this case, my feedback, and then my, I have to make, my comments, right? I don't know, play around with that. Have a little fun with that as well. Okay. So, and then reply to 2 students about their markdown, or, or maybe about their thoughts about the week 1 review as well, right? So about their markdown. So if, as long as it's somewhere either about that or about, part of this, that's what I just want. Substantive replies. I want you to really interact, because this is an important part of being in an online class. Okay. Now, I'm going to bring me back and say thanks so much. I know, let's see, this one a little longer, but this is graded. This is part of your grade. So I hope you have found that, no issues with this. But again, reach out. Oh, one thing I forgot to talk about was the tutor, right? So the tutor can be found. Zach can be his schedule. If you go over and look at my simple syllabus and you scroll down, there's a link for Zach. And definitely reach out to Zach. He's a really great help. Reach out to me. Look at when my office hours are. But the important thing is to get help. Okay. Or if it's late at night, go to Discord, because those folks, maybe your fellow classmates, maybe up. I'm almost guaranteeing you they're up later than I am. All right. Have a good one. See you later.